And he returns to the Supreme Court. This is a court that had its issues among its brilliant people, but it's misdescribed as a bad, non-functional, divided court. This is Robert Jackson, and this is his great antagonist, some would say, Hugo Black. And that's William Douglas. And what you see in this picture, this is 1 week back, is really a lot of what their relationship was. Some intense disagreement, some private disrespect, but a fair amount of personal friendship. And in terms of candle power, this may be among the best courts that we've ever had. This is their group picture in 1951. Fred Vinson is the chief, and you can see they're cracking up. What has come to be important about this life, which ended only 2 years later, in 1954, is the example that Jackson left. And I want to close by showing you some places where the example is very visible, is very audible, is very palpable. One is these folks, our Supreme Court today. There is now a standard ritual, which I'm sure you noticed in the confirmation hearings. Who's your favorite justice? Who do you admire most? Who do you want to be like? And maybe it's just confirmation politics, but clearly the right answer for Republicans and Democrats, for all nominees to offer, is Robert Jackson. John Roberts says his goal is to write like Robert Jackson. Samuel Alito says to think about judicial power like Robert Jackson. Sonia Sotomayor says to write and think about executive power and protect liberties like Robert Jackson. Elena Kagan says all of the above, and to have the independence to step away from the team you used to be on, recognizing that you're now a justice. And partisanship and things that might have been part of your path, and indeed the path that got you to the court, is not your job anymore. Jackson is the most quoted in Supreme Court opinions by far of any justice in our history other than John Marshall. This is another place. It's too close to photograph, but it's the Peace Palace in The Hague. And this is the International Criminal Tribunal of the former Yugoslavia. And there are others, including the International Criminal Court, a permanent successor to Nuremberg now existing in The Hague, but in transition between buildings, that are parts of Jackson focus and Jackson legacy. What he did and built in Nuremberg went into a hiatus for the Cold War, but after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union, is part of modern international law. It's there in Nuremberg. That's the same old building, the Palace of Justice. Today, still a courthouse, dusted off, in use. Major trials happen today in the courtroom where Jackson prosecuted the Nazi leaders. But what also is there is a memoriam to the Nuremberg trials, which is an international education facility and teaching institution on which the board of which I serve. And it was dedicated last November. It is part of Germany embracing and claiming as one of its proudest products and legacies what the Allies did as occupiers, having defeated the Nazis. That's the courtroom, those four windows. And the wind was blowing, so you can't quite see all the flags, but there's an American flag in there and a Union Jack that they now fly. And this is where you see the Jackson legacy. This one happens to be in Germany. This is students visiting the Wannsee Conference House in Berlin, a site where the final solution was actually agreed and memorialized in a document that was captured and that was used as part of the Nuremberg process. The Nuremberg evidence is the basis of our knowledge of the Holocaust. It's the reason Holocaust denial is for crackpots. It's the reason why human rights teaching and education has gone forward the way it has, including in Germany itself, which has become the great democratic land of freedom that it is, because it had this record and this understanding and this process of being treated fairly. And it's back here, Erie, here, Jamestown, here, Chautauqua County, New York, Pennsylvania, across the United States, not just in the Supreme Court, the legal profession, political circles. Robert Gates' speeches as Secretary of Defense, he was a big Jackson quoter. It's not just there. It's here because what Jackson stands for is a kind of life that I think is the better way to live. He did these great things. He achieved these monumental things. But it was part of, frankly, a style of being substantive and meaty and self-taught and ambitious and individualistic and congenial and across-the-aisle relationship building. And frankly, I think that's the model that Jackson's words and Jackson's life and Jackson's achievement in the Jackson Center most powerfully delivers. People are ever more Jacksonian, and I think will continue to be that way because, frankly, it's better. Our best shot at all the tough stuff that we're dealing with is to see a little bit more of how it was done at the high level in his life and copy some of the moves. And one final piece. A little airplane reading coming out here this morning. This week's New York Review of Books, Judge Richard Posner, our brilliant Seventh Circuit, probably America's best judge, just not in the Supreme Court. It's an interview with Judge Posner. And in the midst of it, he's juxtaposing Oliver Wendell Holmes as a justice doing what he thought was right. And he says, Holmes, despite his Civil War experience, was rather cloistered, bookish. He wasn't very practical, but he had great rhetorical skills and was a very thoughtful person, alert to big issues in society, but not interested in nuts and bolts. He was very transparent in his judicial opinions, essays, and of course letters. Jackson was different because he had such a breadth of experience as Attorney General and as the Chief Nuremberg prosecutor and as a close advisor to Roosevelt. He also had a great rhetorical skill so that he could be candid and yet be accepted as a real judge and not just a politician in robes. These are not styles that a law clerk or, frankly, judges easily can emulate. One shouldn't exaggerate the qualities of judges and justices. Law isn't the calling of geniuses. And now he gets a little dismissive about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court today is composed of competent lawyers, and one should probably leave it at that. I don't think the court at present has incandescent intellects of the caliber of Holmes, Louis Brandeis, Jackson, and Frankfurter. And among those greats, you know, we're not playing for one prize, but we have material that gets us really most authentically into one of them as a man, as a life, as a thinker, as an actor. And that's what I work on, that's what I write about, that's what the Jackson Center does, and I'm delighted that you're all interested and part of it. Thank you.